Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Audibles. We are now on episode number 6. And again, I want to thank each and everybody for supporting my online ministry by watching my messages. If you notice, I am shooting right now in this beautiful garden in our home. And it's not an accident that I am outside. Normally, I would shoot indoors because there's lesser elements, but now I needed to be in this garden. Why? Because the story I'm about to share takes place also in a garden. Okay, this is an inspiration from a parable in the New Testament called the parable of the barren fig tree. Okay, it's from Luke chapter 13, verse 6, and I'm going to go ahead and read it to you. It says here, Then Jesus told this story. A man planted a fig tree in his garden and came again and again to see if there was any fruit on it, but he was always disappointed. Finally, he said to his gardener, I have waited 3 years and there hasn't been a single fig. I want you to cut it down. Okay, it's just taking up space in the garden. And the gardener answers this way. He says, Sir, please give it one more chance. Leave it another year, and I will give it special attention and plenty of fertilizer. Now, if we get figs next year, fine. But if not, then please, you can go ahead and cut it down. When I was reading this verse, I could not help but remember my own personal story of when I first started my very first business, all the way back in 2000. See, this was the decade of the mobile phones. I opened two retail outlets in Makati that sold mobile phones. This was the year of the Nokia phones, the 5110s, the 3110s, the 5210s. You remember all that? Those were really good phones, right? Because, the battery lasted us for a week without ever charging at all. And business was so good, but that by the year 2006, I made the decision to open an online store, a website called gadgetgrocery.com. Very good name. In fact, if you were one of my clients, well, thank you for supporting that business of mine. Thank you for putting clothes on my back, for feeding me 3 times a day. But anyway, back then, nobody was buying anything online. Unlike now, people are now buying everything online. We live in a hyper online world in this moment. But you see, back then, nobody was buying anything online. You didn't even have Lazada and Shopee back in those days. I think Sulit.com wasn't even around yet when I opened my website. eBay was the only thing that was open for people to sell in, and also Multiply Marketplace. You remember that? So when I opened my .com, not everybody knew me. So there was nobody buying from me. Nobody trusted me because I was a new player in the market. But so every year, every single month, I would pour in my heart out. I kept planting and planting in that business, that by the year 2010, 3 years later, I somehow was able to manage building a good brand, a brand that people trusted. I had good clients, people were coming and buying from me. And you see, that's one of the secrets in business, that you want to have consistency, because consistency leads to credibility. The more consistent that you provide your products and service with excellence and with honesty and with sincerity, people are going to keep coming back because you are building on that credibility of yours. All right. But anyway, that's for another sharing of mine. So 2010, the business was doing okay. But by the year 2015, sadly, I had to close that business of mine. After 15 years of putting work in that business, I had to make a decision of closing that business for many reasons. But the main reason was that it was no longer producing what I expected it to. And so, with a heavy heart, I had to close my company and move on. And I guess, this is a question that most of us are probably asking in different seasons of our life. Like, how do I know when it's time to let it go? How do I know when it's time to move on from this project? And I love this story because what it's saying is that not everything that you plant is meant to produce. Not everything that you pour your heart out, or whatever it is that you're planting in that garden, not every single plant is meant to bear fruit. Okay, and this is why some businesses fail. This is why some opportunities, they don't pan out. Some investments, they don't work out. It's because not everything that you plant is meant to produce. That's why it's so important that we always have to live within this tension of asking ourselves, is this something that God wants me to plant in this season of my life? And hey, that's a question you want to always consult God with. Why? Because you want God to be part of whatever it is that you're growing, right? And so in this story, going back to the story, it says that there is this fig tree. For 3 years, it hadn't produced any fruit. Jesus doesn't say whether this tree produced any fruit in the past. He's only saying that now for 3 years, it hasn't produced any fruit. But the gardener says, okay, The gardener says, well, sir, please, let's give it another chance. Let's give it another year. I want you to know that in this story, the landowner who owns that fig tree, that represents God. Okay? And then the gardener represents you and me. God represents the landowner in the sense that God owns the land where our life is built on. And we represent the gardener in the sense that, well, whatever we plant in this land, that's on you and me. However we work on this land, or however we don't work on this land, that's also on you and me. And so it's very important that we ask ourselves this reflection question. Here's a question I want you to ask, okay? In the season of your life right now, is there anything that you planted in your garden, but for some reason, it's no longer producing any fruit for many years? Okay, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, it's no longer producing or bearing any fruit. Whether it's an investment, or it's an opportunity, or it's a project. Is there anything? Because what this story is simply telling us is that if there is anything that we planted, sometimes we have to allow God to prune those plants. We have to allow God to remove those things that's no longer producing. In other words, if what you sow doesn't grow, then maybe it's time to let it go. Okay? I hope you're listening to this message, because it's very important that we always think about this, because the landowner says, this fig tree hasn't been producing for 3 years already. It might be taking up space. Okay? It might be using up space. And I wonder, is there anything in your life that's taking up space for other trees to be planted on that same space? Remember that it takes a lot of energy to fertilize any project. And so if you are spending a lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of resources into a single project, but that project is no longer producing, you might be missing out on other opportunities that God wants you to grow. That's why it's so important that we always think about this. Is this still producing what I expect it to? Okay? And the way you can answer that question is that you got to always go back to your purpose. Because remember that it's always in your purpose. Well, it will determine what God wants you to plant in that season of your life to begin with. Like, for example, are you a parent right now? What do you think God wants you to plant in that season of being a parent right now? Are you a single person? What do you think God wants you to plant in that season of your life? You always got to go back to your purpose, because when you know your purpose, you will stop wasting your potential on areas that's not even related to your purpose, right? But again, how do we know when it's time to move on? I think that's a question that you're probably asking. How do we know when it's time to move on? The fig tree hadn't been producing for 3 years, okay? And then the gardener says, well, cut it down. It hasn't been producing for 3 years. But again, the gardener says, let's leave it there for 1 more year. Okay? Give it another chance, 1 more year. So, is that the answer to that question? How do I know when it's time to move on? Is the answer 1 more year? Or should I give it some more time? Should I spend more time on it? See, I don't think that the answer is 1 year, or I don't think that it's a matter of time. Yes, the time is very important, but I don't think that time is the answer. Because I know this, because the gardener answers this way. He doesn't say, okay, let's just leave it there for 1 more year. He doesn't stop there. Instead, what does he say? Let's leave it for 1 more year, and then I will give it special attention and plenty of fertilizer. So clearly, the answer is not about duration, but it's about attention. Okay? If the project or the thing that you planted in your life, if you have given it all the attention, all the resources, all the time in the world, but it's still not producing according to your expectation, then maybe it's time to let it go. So you simply have to ask yourself this question: have I really given it my best shot? Have I really given it my entire self? If I have given it some time, if I have given it the attention, but it still hasn't grown according to expectation, well, maybe then it's time to let it go. That's my message for today, and I hope that it really blessed and spoke to you. I pray that God will continue to use my online ministry to inspire you. Again, thank you for watching this online blog. God bless you, and God move in your life this week.